Hello, and welcome to step 3 of how to make your plushie. Step 3 involves actually pinning your pattern pieces to your fabric and cutting them out. I've already done most of that to help save on time and make these videos a little shorter, but I am going to walk you through easier ways to pin and situate your pattern pieces on your fabric to get the most bang for your buck. Here I have the front of my plushie, and you can see I've got quite a few pins in this bad boy. This is because I want to make sure that my pattern piece is flush with my fabric. You can see from the back that, there's places where it's kind of puckery just a little bit, but that's because you're taking something very soft and pinning it to something very stiff. The paper is very stiff when compared to the felt. But there's not like big wrinkles pinned in. I laid my pattern very flat against my my fabric, my felt, and tried really hard to make sure that there weren't any bubbles. Pardon me. Any bubbles, any wrinkles in the fabric. If there are wrinkles in the fabric and I cut them out along with my pattern piece, it's going to really, especially with as small a scale as this is, drastically change the measurements for the fabric pattern part of my plushie. So make sure when you do this that you lay them nice and flat, and then I like to pin opposite sides. So I started with this pin right here in his forehead, and then I pinned here between his legs, and then I pinned this arm, and then I pinned this arm, and then I worked my way around Tundra the tiger. And this just sort of helps keep him, well, her, I've decided it's a her, but it doesn't matter. Keep her nice and flat to the fabric. It helps get rid of any wrinkling or bubbling that might occur. And I did this for the back of her and for her tail and all of it. Now you might notice, also we have the ears and the nose, and then the tummy, the cheeks, and the chin. Now you'll notice that all of my pattern pieces are pinned to like the corners and the very edges, right? I don't have anything pinned right smack dab in the middle. Even these big pieces are pinned right up into the corners. The little hand is almost touching the edge of the fabric. Same thing for the ears. And that's because we want to conserve fabric. Fabric conservation is key. So this is true no matter what you are working on. If you're making a blouse out of woven fabric, oftentimes there'll be instructions on the pattern that you buy. If you're going with a commercial pattern, there'll be instructions on how to lay out the pattern pieces that they give you on the fabric to make the best use of your fabric, because it also tells you how much fabric to buy. So if you buy the correct amount of fabric and you lay out the pattern pieces exactly like it says in the instructions, then you know you'll have enough fabric to do your project. Now, this pattern piece I sort of created, and the teddy bear pattern that it came off of on the internet did not have those instructions. That said, I still want to conserve as much fabric as I possibly can because I can use that fabric in later projects. Think of this like the Great Depression, when your grandparents didn't even throw out like milk cartons, right? Because they could be useful to store things because everybody was so strapped for cash. Fabric, not necessarily this felt. This felt's probably like 29 cents a sheet, so not crazy expensive. But fabric can get incredibly expensive. So we try to conserve as much as possible We try to make sure that the pieces we leave behind are big enough that we could use them for other projects. This piece over here, for example, and this piece here are pretty good sized. Now, if I had taken this little back section and put it right in the center of this piece of felt, I wouldn't have big chunks like this, right? I would have much smaller chunks all the way around him. I want bigger chunks because I can do more with bigger chunks. And this is true for every piece. Every piece is done in the corner or off to the side. Especially like these two little guys are just up here by their lonesome, so that I have all this felt for future projects I can use it for. And that's what you need to do. For every project, conserve what you can. I want to bring to your attention that none of these pins are sticking out of the felt. So for example, I don't have a single pin that's like this, right? There's not a single one that's sticking out. They're all tucked in onto the paper part of the pattern, so that the heads, these little beads, are on the paper. Now, this is because I'm going to cut out around the fabric. I'm going to cut the fabric out around this paper pattern, and if I have things sticking out, my scissors can't go through them. I'll have to like end up like bending my fabric and cutting, and then it might not be true to what I want. So if I keep the pins on the paper part, I don't have to worry about them when I go to cut around my pattern piece. Now, when I get into smaller and smaller pattern pieces, such as these ones, that's not really true, because these are so small that there's absolutely no way to put a pin on them and not have it stick out. In which case, I just do exactly what I said and cut around the pin and do the best I can. So here I have the white pieces. I have the cheeks, I have the chin, I have the tummy. So I'm going to show you that technique of pinning from opposite sides to achieve the least amount of wrinkling or puckering on the back as possible. So I am putting this right on the edge. And because this is felted fabric, it doesn't matter which direction I put this at all, because there's no grain. There's no grain to this fabric. On the other hand, if we were working with a woven fabric, there is grain. You can see the weave and the weft, right, of these little fibers, right? We have fibers coming this way and we have fibers coming this way, and that is on grain, cross grain. If we put something this way, it would be on the bias. So, and we really, really have to worry and concentrate on how we put pattern pieces on woven fabric. If you buy a pattern from the store, it's going to have the grain line on it, and it's sort of a line, and it's got arrows on each end. And that's so that you can place that line on grain, meaning it goes with the longest fibers going down the bolt of fabric, so that it will hang right. If we tug on this piece of woven fabric on grain, there's not a whole lot of give. There is a little bit because of this is cotton and that's a natural fiber. And it's a really loosely, I mean, not as loose as like burlap, but it is a loosely woven cotton. And so there are going to be a little bit of give. There is going to be a little bit of give when I pull it on grain, but not a whole lot. Cross grain this way, there's even less. There's even less give when I pull across grain. There's almost none at all. But on the bias, right, if I go diagonally, so I'm not going with the long fibers this way or with the not quite as long fibers this way, I'm actually pulling across them. There is so much give. Look at how elastic that is. Look how much stretch I get out of it. That's a lot. If you are really wanting like a tailored suit, right? Something that needs to hang in a very specific way. but you cut the pattern pieces, the fabric pieces, on the bias, that's going to have a very different hang to it than if you did it on grain. Do you see the difference? So here's on grain. You get those drag lines when I pull on it, but not a whole lot on the bias. Oh, look at all that. It's crazy. And I'm putting the same amount of force. Okay? When I pull cross grain, there's like hardly anything. There's no give. There's hardly any pull lines. A few more pull lines, a little bit more give, and lots of pull. It even makes the little corners come in, and lots of lines. So we don't have to worry about that with felt, which is the nice thing. You don't have to worry about it. Because it doesn't have weave. Remember, these are fibers that have just been pressed together with no rhyme or reason. But it's also why it doesn't fray. So I have my little white tummy piece. I'm going to put it right up next to the edge, and I'm going to put my pin in right here, and then I'm going to hold with one finger. I'm going to hold down the fabric where my pin is, and then with the other hand, I'm going to sort of smooth down, okay? And then I'm going to put another pin down here. And the reason that this one's going this way while this one's going this way is literally just because this is a much narrower piece of paper. Down here, if I tried to make the pin go this way, it would stick out on either side, and as we've talked about, we don't really want that. This piece of pattern is relatively small. I could totally get away with only doing these two pins, but just for the sake of showing you, if this was a much bigger piece, I then go from the center and smooth out to either side. Because this is such a small piece, I can actually just do it one-handed. If it was a bigger piece, I would use both hands and do it. Okay, and put a pin in there, smooth, put a pin in right here. And I'm done. And there is a little bit of puckering, but that's just because, like I said, we're putting something that's very stiff. This paper is very stiff, and we're attaching it to something very soft and scrunchy. But if I feel here, there's no big bubbles, there's no big wrinkles happening, and that's what we want to see. What we don't want to see is the fabric do this in any way, shape, or form underneath. And it doesn't. So we are good to go. I'm going to take my scissors. In a perfect, beautiful world, these would be fabric scissors, and I would be able to go through very quickly and easily. These are not fabric scissors. I am in my classroom, not in the costume shop, and I do not have fabric scissors up here. So we work with what we have. You probably don't have fabric scissors at home either, so you'll kind of get an idea of what this experience will be like for you. And now we are literally just going to cut around everything, making sure that we are very, very precise in cutting around our small. You can see here that going around all those tiny little pieces with these big old scissors is pretty much a pain in the neck. What would be really helpful for this project is a pair of snips. Snips are tiny, very sharp sewing scissors. If you can get your hands on a pair of snips, your life is golden. I'm telling you, they make this sort of work so much easier. Now, because I'm working with these big scissors and I'm having to sort of pull the pieces of fabric that I'm cutting away from the actual cheek pieces, it's making the felt left behind very, very fuzzy. Now, I don't actually mind it for this project. I think that that'll help, just give more verisimilitude, more truthfulness to my tiger, to have very furry, fuzzy cheeks. That being said, uh, definitely would rather have a pair of snips that are sharp and small and can get into these tiny nooks and crannies. So I'm not having to pull those pieces away from my actual pattern pieces. Okay, so I have 2 ears and only 1 pattern piece for my ears, which is fine because they're the exact same thing. I can just use this pattern piece again. Now, if this was the type of fabric that had a right side and a wrong side, maybe there's a pattern printed on one side, I would have to take my little earpiece and actually flip it over and cut my next pattern piece from it. And that's so they would be mirrors of each other and they could go on the opposite ears and still be okay. If I cut out this exact same piece the exact same way, like this, they would not be mirrors. They would not look, they would not have symmetry. They wouldn't be symmetrical because we would take it and then just move it this way. And you see how this has a curve up? Here it would curve down on this ear. Where there's two little triangles taken out. If we wanted it to be symmetrical, we'd have to have 2 little triangles taken out here, and they wouldn't be. They would be down here at the bottom of this one. So if this was a piece of fabric where it mattered, I would turn this piece over, and that way now you can see they are symmetrical. If I had the face running right here, I would have this ear, and they would look exactly the same. I'm going to go ahead and do that, not because it matters, but just because it's good to get in the habit. In case you're wondering, hey, why didn't she flip those pattern pieces around to cut them out the second time? The answer is she forgot. It's a really good thing that we're working with felt that doesn't have a right or a wrong side and is very forgiving. I know, too much cutting. You've seen too much cutting. We'll cut to the end. Pun intended.